I'm Arta. I'm an attorney here in California who specializes in employment law. Welcome to the HR is Dead and We Killed It podcast. I'm here with Ryan Ellis, good friend of mine for 15 years now, also a fellow attorney here in California that practices employment law and does HR consulting. Ryan, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Arta. Glad to be part of this groundbreaking podcast. As Arta said, my name is Ryan Ellis. I am an attorney in California, also licensed in Nevada, Texas, and Michigan. Focus on employment defense, and have doing so for essentially the last 15 years. I'm glad to be here.
So the reason we started this podcast is that we have been working tangentially in the HR industry as attorneys, me as a plaintiff attorney suing companies and Ryan defending them. And we thought that after seeing years and years of companies just make really stupid mistakes that they were repeating over and over in all aspects of running a company, wage and hour discrimination, handbook setting all up, that we could provide a little bit of insight from the attorney's perspective on first, things that a plaintiff's attorney would look for in a company, whether or not it would be a good decision to sue this company for one of their clients. And then also from Ryan's perspective, working with these companies as a defense attorney, just figuring out what they did that led them to getting sued by their employees.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, a long time ago we realized that being attorneys, is great and all, but we only get involved in companies essentially when, the stuff hits the fan, right? Like we're not there in the beginning telling them, hey, no, don't discriminate for that, that reason, or hey, no, don't tell that person to cut their hair, or hey, no, don't tell that person they can't go to their mom's funeral, kind of a thing. And so we realized a while ago that we should start consulting. And so we do that on the side. Actually, we thought it was going to be on the side, but it ended up being a full-time gig. And so a lot of our time now is consumed with HR consulting. And instead of being the person that gets paid, an absurd amount of money by any standard to fix a problem, we're there to proactively try to avoid it.
Yeah, and one of the things that has happened in HR over the past 20 years, I think, is that HR has turned from the kind of party planning department into a quasi-legal department at most companies, and a lot of tasks that shouldn't be HR related, firing and things like that, and making decisions on firing that should be something that management and general counsel and C-suite employees should be really involved in, has just been dumped off on this poor HR department that was not designed for doing anything more than really administrative tasks.
And it's funny, two points you hit there that are very important that I'm sure will take hours of podcasting is the poor HR department, because it's always understaffed and undervalued and underpaid. As well as California, for listeners out there who aren't in California. California is like a haven for plaintiffs lawyers, and what that means is by employees suing their employers or former employers for issues in California, because it's so hard to comply. And I say so hard because companies from the Amazons, the Walmarts, the FedExes, all the way down to the mom and pop gas stations, all have to deal with the same laws. And I always say this to clients, that if FedEx can't get it right, if Walmart can't get it right, if UPS can't get it right, if Amazon can't get it right, then how are the 1 and 2 person, no legal experience, no HR experience companies supposed to make it here? And that's what we're seeing in California litigation.
Yeah, and we're seeing a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses try to take on a role that they're really not prepared for. I mean, I think a lot of business owners, they're very competent in areas like sales and business growth, but becoming the main HR person for the company without a lot of legal help, especially in a place like California, that's a whole competency that you have to learn. And in the same way that you wouldn't necessarily do all your own accounting or your payroll and things like that, I think HR is rapidly becoming one of those things that companies have to look to outside help for because of all the legal pitfalls.
Yeah, and I kind of underscore there and highlight the same thing off that, which one's better. But same thing in California, like you want to hire somebody in California to do HR work, like first they need experience, and that costs money. Then you need to have someone who wants to come in the office nowadays, which is going to cost you more money if you can find them. And you want to find someone you can trust, who is smart enough to think outside the box in situations where you need them to, or to work with somebody, or to find a solution when one doesn't exist. So in California specifically, and a lot of this is going to be tailored to California, given that we're here a lot, and all of the litigation, most of the litigation we deal with is in California. But anyway, it's expensive. you want to hire an HR executive, you're looking at, at an HR director, HR high-level manager, or even a VP of HR, however your company may classify it, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for one person. And that one person is, as a C-suite person or a high-level director, is supposed to be making like future decisions for the company in an HR perspective. They're not supposed to be here talking about, hey, why is Sally complaining about Tommy or whatever. And so it's expensive. HR is expensive, and that's why I think, and Arta, you can I guess comment on this one, is why companies consistently undervalue the HR department, underfund the HR department, and then interestingly later complain that HR isn't doing anything and seeing it as like a budget cut.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because HR is a department that defies metrics in companies, because most companies, they're going to measure success by sales, by growth, by opening new locations, by hiring more people, signing contracts. And HR, their progress in a company or the value to the company doesn't reflect in the same terms. How do you measure company happiness, and employee happiness in a measurable way that you could put in a spreadsheet? You can't. You can compare like the amount of lawsuits that a company faces after implementing new policies compared to before, but it's kind of hard for an HR director to come in and say, well, hey, I prevented 50 lawsuits this year and saved you. It's impossible. And so that's one of the big problems that I think HR people have, is nobody in the company wants to go to HR for any reason, and the only time they really want to go to HR is when they have to dump off a task that they don't want to do. And I'm really talking about management there when it comes to kind of dealing with interpersonal conflicts for employees and hiring and firing issues. And HR has just been given a lot of tasks that it wasn't meant for. So one of the things that I want to talk about with you, Ryan, is understanding HR's role in a larger sense in a business, what it's actually supposed to do, what it's supposed to look like. And one thing I want to start with is the perception of HR and one thing in HR not being your friend.
Well, I was going to say, how do you want me to come at you with this one? Do you want to give you my thoughts on from like a management perspective? Do you want to give it to you from an HR perspective or like an outside legal perspective?
I think probably I would want to start with the management perspective. I think it's important for you to be able to give management an idea of what HR is thought of by employees in general.
I'll tell you right now, HR to management and to employees is HR does everything and nothing at the exact same time. Because if I have an issue, HR has got to handle it. Because I can't go to my manager or director, they're not going to do that. HR needs to fix it. And they're always understaffed, undervalued, underpaid. And then when they don't do anything, guess who's in trouble for that? It's HR. It always comes down to HR. And then if for some reason Sally gets a promotion and Tommy doesn't, guess whose fault that is? HR's. So HR is like the scapegoat of all scapegoats in organizations. So from an employee perspective and a management perspective, I think they're the same. I mean, management expects HR to do more than they're supposed to. At the same time, employees in most companies that we've dealt with that have more than 4 people or 5 people, HR does everything. Like they want to do everything. There's companies that we've represented in the past where the HR person is the accounting person that is the vice president of sales. I mean, they're all the same thing. And so when you have bigger companies, they don't fund it properly. And when you have smaller companies, the people that are tasked with those jobs don't have the time.
Yeah, and as a plaintiff's attorney, we run into a lot of situations where the head HR person is kind of like a legacy person who was originally working in a different department when the company was smaller, and as the company grew, they had been handed off certain tasks to them that was kind of HR stuff, like giving new hires paperwork and stuff like that, and then they became the de facto HR person after being the parts manager or a cashier.
Well, that was after they were trained, right?
Yeah.
I mean, but the person that started as an accounts manager had to go back to school for HR training, right?
I mean, they should.
But they didn't.
Yeah, they didn't. And
right.
Exactly. And this is the problem that a lot of companies are having, is that this is really a legal department, because the consequences of getting it wrong are a lawsuit, which can be extremely expensive. Even if the company, finds out at the end of the day that they're not going to be held liable, or there's a settlement before it goes to trial, it's still going to cost a ton of money to go through that process. And
well, I want to piggyback on that, and I know that how much that cost can get exponential. I'm talking like hundreds of millions of dollars, as you've seen as a plaintiff's attorney, and I've seen Not in my cases, but I've seen in other cases that you see judgments that are just absurd. And I say absurd like lottery money. It just takes a ton of money to get there. But at the same time, from an HR perspective, to kind of share my thoughts on what HR thinks. HR, it's interesting because HR thinks the same thing that management thinks, but with a different view, right? Obviously, the view is, well, I'm supposed to do everything. I'm not being paid enough money to do this, so F it. Like, yeah. I'll just make a flippant decision based on like not a full range of facts because I don't have time for this. And that's like in a perfect environment. I have two small kids. I know you do too, but like if you're having a bad day because you couldn't sleep last night because your kid was sick, is that going to help you the next day at work? Of course not. So when you come to work and you have to be responsible for 1,000 employees or 2,000 employees in the company as like an HR manager or director, you're going to wear that baggage to work. And when you come to work and that happens, guess what? You're not going to perform your best. And so when you're dealing with high-level decisions that sometimes need to be made very quickly because you can't get a hold of legal counsel, you can't get a hold of your GC, your directors or your co-directors, your CEO isn't answering your phone calls anymore, what do? You make poor decisions.
Yeah, and I think what you touched on is also important is that a lot of these C-suite employees or management people who are supposed to be in on a lot of the decisions that HR is tasked with and kind of thrown at them, they don't want to deal with it. And they just say, let HR deal with it. And they try to hide away or shy away from these decisions and just leave it to HR. And then if things go wrong, they just blame HR.
Right.
And one thing that's very difficult that I see for a lot of HR personnel just themselves is that as HR, they're looked at as hall monitors. And other employees, want to stay away from them so they don't get in trouble. And HR employees, they have to sometimes enact discipline or deal with interpersonal situations. And I think that leads to a lot of loneliness for HR people at the workplace, which sounds kind of funny, but they do get isolated because they're looked at as the bad guy at work.
Yeah. No, and that's true because you said hall monitor, and I just thought of like a school, like a high school situation where a hall monitor is walking up and down the halls. The kids that are doing things that don't want to be seen are kind of hiding between lockers or in the bathroom. The kids that are running by and throwing stuff at them or doing a spitball at them. And you have the kids who are trying to do good and follow the rules, are walking like this and being all good with their books or whatever. So that's a great example. Because that person that's in that hallway is either a volunteer or they're not being paid enough to be there. So, and then they're tasked to do these company changing or company, drastic decisions, and they're not qualified, not being paid, and don't give a crap.
Yeah, and exactly. They don't have a good rapport with the rest of the employees. And I think it leads to a lot of breakdowns in decision making that lead to situations with interpersonal problems not getting taken care of the way they should and blowing up into larger situations. And management is not getting enough communication from HR about what the mood is on the ground with their employees.
Yeah, so you asked me you preface this with HR is not your friend. Tell me why you think HR is not your friend.
Well, one thing that I do to keep up with trends in work and human resources and just the relationship between employee and employer is go on a lot of forums like Reddit that have subreddits about HR-related topics and issues. There's Ask HR, there's Human Resources, all these different subreddits where people come in and they either ask questions as HR people about what to do in certain situations, or it'll be employees asking questions about something that happened to them at work and whether or not what the company did was fair or not, or how to proceed. So one of the things that you always see after somebody, say an employee asks a question about what do I do? Do I go to HR in this situation? It's almost inevitable that somebody is going to comment, just HR is not your friend, or never go to HR, never talk to HR. They're not on your side. They're only on the company's side.
So they're being paid by the company. I mean, they're on company payroll, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. But I mean, this is a situation where they're not supposed to really be on anybody's side. The whole point is just to be an administrative wing of the company, and they've been turned into this kind of like principal's office where employees get sent when they get in trouble. And
they're supposed to self-report. Like the employees are supposed to self-report to the governing body. Essentially this HR office when something goes wrong or they think something goes wrong.
Exactly. And if they are at a company where HR already is disorganized, or a company doesn't necessarily have all their ducks in the row when it comes to administrative stuff and just being able to explain HR related stuff to their employees lose trust in the company as a whole, and they always think that HR is going to be siding with the boss or with management, when a lot of times the reality is it's not in the company's best interest for HR to side with management, because they could have a situation where something needs to be investigated, or management has done something wrong.
Yeah, well, and that's where it makes it in our best interest as attorneys, because plaintiff side attorneys, you want them to screw up because you capitalize on that with a lawsuit. As defense attorneys, I mean, unfortunately, we get paid that way, but I'm paid a little different than you are as a defense attorney. But that's what happens. I mean, if the HR company, and that's a common misconception, where if HR was to side with the company every single time, or if HR was like aligned with the CEO's wishes at all times, I mean, there would be an immense amount of litigation, and there'd be so many problems. The law would be much worse than it is now, but I mean, that's absolutely not the case. And I agree with you. I agree with the principle that HR is not your friend, because a lot of people in HR roles, like we talked about earlier, aren't experienced enough to diversify or bifurcate the issue of like personal and business, especially in the HR role. But then you have, well, I'm not going to go to HR if there's a problem, because I don't want somebody knowing about me and Sally's relationship, or I don't want to know that I got harassed at work, and I don't want what's the saying, loose lips sink ships. And at the end of the day, HR people are people, and an HR department can be a mill of gossip depending on the kind of business that you run and the enforcement that you handle internally. So I don't know. I think HR can be your friend if you use it properly, but I also think that if you think HR is an all-knowing being like the Wizard of Oz, you're gonna have a lot of problems.
Yeah, and just from a plaintiff's attorney standpoint, when I have a potential client come in and they tell me about a situation where they feel like they've been harassed or discriminated, and I ask them, well, have you gone to HR? And they say no, I'm looking at it like, okay, I just lost a potential chunk of money here that we could go after, because really the way that, in my eyes, that the law interprets things is that what an employee should do is try to get things resolved internally and give the company a chance to fix it before they reach outside, to an attorney to try to get things done. Because one of the first things that a mediator or a judge will ask in a situation with discrimination or harassment is, did you go to HR? Did you put it in writing? So what's your perspective on employees who just go straight to a lawyer and don't go internally?
That's a good question. I honestly think that if you don't go to HR, you try to sue, you're gonna have problems. Wage and hour is a little bit different, even though it's related to like employment issues. But if you don't go to HR and have them try to fix your issue, there's always exceptions. Like if some grossly aggrieved party gets abused, like sexually abused or physically abused, or some certain types of emotional abuse, there's really no like do not pass go situation, but you should always take it to HR. Like maybe you're getting lewd comments as an employee and you don't feel comfortable because somebody's making jokes about things you don't find appropriate at work. That's something that you should immediately sue for, in my opinion, because HR can take that information and can easily, I think, come to a solution and remedy the situation. And there's a wide range of things to do there. So I think, from a defense perspective, if I see a case come in or across my desk that HR was not consulted on and they just went right to lawsuit, especially on issues that I believe can be fixed, to me, I'm going to make money on it because I have to go through the process of what plaintiffs do when they file lawsuits, but it's going to be a defense victory, in my opinion, given that you didn't give us a chance to fix it.
Yeah, and you touched on something that was important, cases where it is kind of appropriate to go straight to a lawyer. And just to give a couple examples, because people always want to know about the exceptions, I've found that sexual harassment is a good one, where people don't feel comfortable going to the company. And one of the things that's very important to keep in mind is the severity of what happened. So if you have a sexual harassment situation where somebody has physically touched you or made extremely, extremely offensive or lewd comments, that might be an appropriate situation. Or in a small company that maybe doesn't have the whole separate HR department, and your HR department is the owner of the company, or your boss who's the same person perpetrating the harassment, then of course go to a lawyer, because what's the point of going and telling the guy who's doing the harassing? I mean, he's going to put on like a different hat, from CEO, harasser, and HR, and you're going to have to talk to each different person. So yeah, of course that doesn't make sense.
I laugh because that situation comes up too often. Just the true definition of the word comedy or comical, because if the person harassing you is also your boss and also the HR person, clearly we don't want to go to that person, but that's what the law expects you to do. And hence that being funny. It's obviously not funny if somebody being harassed. So I want to make sure I make that clear, not laughing at the harassment. It's absolutely terrible. But the fact that the law would like you to go to that person and ask them to stop or to do something about it, when the person who has to do or take that action, being the person who did the harassing, it's absurd.
Yeah, and one of the things as a plaintiff's attorney, the reason I want my clients to go to HR is because if the company then fails to investigate the situation, that gives me a much stronger claim. Or if they investigate and they screw it up or it's obviously biased, I know I'm dealing with a company that doesn't know what it's doing, and I'm going to get the HR person or the manager in a deposition and just kind of run circles around them about why they didn't want to engage in a real investigative process to find out what this person's issue is and see if they could fix it. So I love it when people tell me they've gone through an investigation.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up too, the failure to investigate, failure to kind of remedy the situation, because a lot of times in bigger companies, there's always a solution. Like again, barring the extreme lows and extreme highs of like conduct, you know, if Sally is not being nice to Tommy for whatever reason, and it's a correctable issue, move departments, change schedules, put them in a different desk. I mean, there's so many things that can be done, but the company either doesn't do it, which to me is ridiculous, because moving somebody's desk or even having to buy an additional desk for a few $100s and moving them to a different spot of the building if there's space, to me is like, well, you wouldn't spend $600, but you'll spend $50,000 defending a lawsuit? Like, that makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it's just a lot of these lawsuits we see is just the product of stubbornness from management, and what is it, ripping off your nose to spite your face? Or that's kind of what happens, is that they don't want to seem like they're going to let employees take advantage of them and everything is made up. And you don't know that until you've gone through an investigation. So it's also very important for companies to investigate things thoroughly. So when they do get into a lawsuit situation, they have a lot of plausible deniability in the sense that, oh yeah, we took this seriously, because one thing juries look at is how the reaction of the company to the problem kind of manifested itself, rather than necessarily just the acute kind of situation that caused the problem.
Yeah, well, that brings up another issue, which is trust. How does an employee trust somebody to have their best interests at heart? And as like a collateral question, how does that employee have that trust in another employee, HR, an employee to trust in HR, when that other person seems to be or has a veil of like corporate bureaucracy that they're going to be on the side of the company?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of times what happens with HR people who have forgot the humanity aspect of their job, because it is human resources, you have to behave kind of humanely, is that they have to understand that people have feelings, and these feelings are going to affect the entire workforce. If they're consistently not investigating claims or firing people who bring up problems, this is something that's going to affect the company very deeply and cause a lot of problems. So it's very important to take both, as an employer, to take your claims brought to you from employees seriously, and as an employee to give the business or employer a chance to solve things.
And is that the trust you're talking about? I mean, and I agree. The problem, though, with having trust in somebody else is that they're not you, right? So do you have any thoughts about companies increasing the awareness of the HR department and that they should trust the HR department? Because my initial reaction to that question that I just posed would be, well, if you're telling me to trust this person, why are you telling me that? There's obviously some reason that corporate wants me or you as an employee to trust this third person. Why is that? What is going on in corporate's mind, right? When you have the 1984 sense of surveillance going on, are they telling corporate behind my back? Is that why I didn't get promoted last year? Is that why I didn't get a raise? Is that why I didn't get let off to go to my kid's graduation last week on my requested time off? Like, do you have any suggestions or experience with times when you need to increase awareness of HR that you should trust HR?
I think a lot of it starts with the way that managers kind of interact with their employees, and whether or not managers are first taking the time to see if they can solve the problem before just handing it off to HR. I think that makes a big impression on employees if the manager is not taking time and just kind of...
So you mean they have to do their job?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is this?
Yeah, go to the principal's office. Because if you're a student, you just think about work and school are very similar, and being in work situations, I think mentally puts people in a place where they almost feel like they're back at school. and the managers are their teachers, and HR is like the principal's office. And so there's an issue where employees feel like infantilized almost. They're just getting sent to HR and they're not heard by their management or the people who are directly involved in the problem. So I think one of the things that you could do to build trust just in the company in general is just to train your managers in interpersonal skills and conflict management, and just learning how to just be like a nice, normal person that doesn't hide behind the rules and regulations of the company, but kind of stands by them. I think that's a big distinction.
It's funny, as a kid growing up, I really liked to follow rules. I wasn't one to jaywalk. I wasn't one to kind of do anything that wasn't supposed to do, just because that's how I was raised or how I grew up. But like, you realize when you have these thoughts going into adulthood, especially becoming a lawyer and representing these large corporations, where it's like, I think to myself, what do you mean you didn't follow the rules? What do you mean you were drinking on the job? You should have known that, like, you're a person, right? You should have known, you're an adult, you should have known better.
It's common sense.
Yeah, common sense. But like, and that's like a very good point to hit on, is that the common sense here is just lost in HR, I think, from both sides. Because there's a lot of things that plaintiffs or aggrieved employees do at work that's just, in my opinion, stupid and nonsensical. At the same time, HR, the more I see from the defense side, is there's too many things that HR just flubs because it makes no sense. But like, going back to my example of like, I follow the rules. Why don't you follow the rules? Hey, you're not supposed to drink at work. Like, why are you doing it? You know the rules right there. You have the handbook that you signed. Like, why are you doing this? And all of a sudden you realize that not everybody is like you, one, and two is that nobody really cares. At the end of the day, no one cares. And if they do care, it's because they read it and want to make everything better, but they become jaded after a certain point of time when nobody enforces those rules. And so, and I think I'm trying to relate this very poorly, I think, to your suggestion of trying to have managers do their job and train managers, because I guarantee, because I had this experience where you have a manager who manages 5 employees. If those 5 employees are doing their job, drunk or not, the manager doesn't give a crap because they're doing their job. The manager's job is to get the work done. If the work is done, they don't care, sober or not. Although it's grossly, against a lot of most likely internal policies and some laws, and probably more depending on the industry you're in, it just becomes an issue. And so as you get these people of I don't care, then that goes down and down and down to nothing. Everybody becomes just kind of a cog in a machine.
Yeah, and I think that's very important. It relates back to what I was talking about, like putting the humanity back into human resources, is that they're treating everybody equally does not necessarily lead to a better workplace, because different positions in companies should be treated differently. If you have an employee who is late every single day, you have to look at the totality of the situation. What kind of employee is this? Is this like, if you're a security guard who's got to be at work at 9 a.m. to be able to open the door so everybody can get in, yes, tardiness is extremely important and an issue that needs to be dealt with. But if you're, say, managing a group of 10 engineers or 5 engineers, like you were talking about, and somebody comes in 10 minutes late every day, but they're staying half an hour later, their projects always get done, it doesn't then make sense to enforce these tardiness rules against this person. And there, like I said, it's treating everybody equally doesn't necessarily lead to better results. And a lot of people, I think, they detest, being thought of as like, oh, this employee has different rights than I do and I have to be here or whatever. But that's just kind of the reality.
I'm smiling because that reminds me of research I've done on colorblind constitutionalism when it relates to like rights as to race and like status, and how the Supreme Court justices over the years have interpreted colorblind constitutionalism, where like, yes, it's separate but equal, or yes, it's whatever the law is, and how different people see the same thing different ways. I'm smiling because my example was you need to follow the rules. That's why I was brought up. If I'm here at 9 o'clock, you should be here at 9 o'clock. And your example as a plaintiff's attorney was, which should have been my example, is, well, you're 10 minutes late, but you stay 30 minutes after. Why do I care? You're getting your work done. And so that's the same issue seen 2 different ways, and depending on who's doing it, depending on how it's done, depending on how often it's done, and if the rules were applied equally to everybody, if that actually becomes an issue that a plaintiff may bring or a defense may have to deal with.
Yeah, and that just goes to highlight the difficulty of defining common sense, because common sense, there could be a whole bunch of solutions to one problem that could be considered common sense, but one is the best solution. And when people are in a position as HR people or as management people or even as employees who are being affected by something at the company, it's a forest for the trees situation. A lot of times you're so mired in the details and because of what you're dealing with in the company and all the possible consequences and unintended consequences that could happen, that you don't realize, hey, I'm just doing something really dumb. Why am I getting on my best employee who's making $200,000 a year as an engineer for being 10 minutes late? Who cares?
Yeah. Who's never been late on a project delivery, who's never screwed up a calculation, and now you're jeopardizing your business over 10 minutes.
So what would you say? Let's say you had a manager who called you and there's this situation where a lower level employee like a security guard or somebody who needs to be there on time every day is complaining about, like, let's say a kind of engineering type employee being 10 minutes late every day.
That's tough. And that goes back to my example of everybody needs to follow the same rules. Because if that employee who needs to be there at 10 a.m. or whatever starts getting jaded at their job, then I have to choose between my risk and reward, right? If I want my engineer, if I enforce the rules against the engineer, then I might lose a lot of business and or money, possibly face a lawsuit depending on how I do it. But if I don't discipline that engineer, the security guard on that side or whoever on that example is going to come to a point where they're not going to care anymore. And once that person is late, 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, however good you are at enforcing, then I have to start enforcing against that person. And they're going to say, well, you didn't do it, and enforce those rules against the engineer. And then I have to deal with that issue. So really, I have to deal with something either way as a business owner or an HR person or whatever. I don't know how I would handle that. I think I would I think I'd hit a middle ground. I think I would say something like, well, company-wide email, company-wide something, I'd like a pizza lunch. That's like the HR joke, right? Everybody solves everything with a pizza lunch. So on like a Friday afternoon, I'd say, hey, everybody gets pizza. I'll pick a name out of a hat for a pizza restaurant. And as I'm handing out the pizza to everybody, I say, just reminder everybody be on time. Like kind of do like an informal, but I'm also giving you some pizza situation and hope that it works. And if it doesn't, fix the issue. Because that would be a guise of enforcement, but at the same time trying to resolve it. Then I'd have to think of something else. Maybe 2 pizza weeks. 2 pizza parties.
Make sure it's good pizza. I think that's really the first step in employee relations. Is make sure you know.
Well, it's like the HR joke, right? Like you see everything like, oh, I was sexually harassed at work. Like, okay, cool, we'll throw you a pizza party next week. Like that's just how HR, like you said, and that's I don't know if you intended that, but a great like circumspect, back to your point of like HR is a party planner. Like nobody gives it like a serious connotation. No one thinks it's real. If they think it's real, it's because they have to deal with HR and they hate them. And all they do is throw parties, like which is not anything close to what they do.
Or force you to sit through trainings on whatever the topic, the sexual harassment training or the discrimination training, where they see these trainings and then they don't see the things that are happening in the training being implemented in the company, and they care even less and they respect the department even less. But it also, just like you touched on, as a business owner, there's situations where are going to be net losses no matter what you do.
But you can reduce the net.
Yeah, right? exactly.
The net loss can be, some issues you're dealing with that employee, or it could be, $100,000 in legal fees to defend a lawsuit.
Exactly, and that's when you have to choose. And a lot of times with smaller businesses, this is when the owner's kind of own personal attitude can get in the way of good business decisions. And it's just really difficult. Like you were saying, you would throw a pizza party and tell everyone to be on time. And it's very difficult as a manager to go to that security guard or receptionist and tell them, hey, listen, you have a different position than the person that you're complaining about. This has nothing to do with you. And kind of just letting them know that the expectations from the company for them are different from other employees. And
well, let's make that official. What would you do in that same situation?
Honestly, I think that's what I would do. I would want to know why it's bothering the employee so much that this person is late.
Well, the answer is because they're not on time, and that's what the rule says.
And then
I got to be on time. Why can't you be on time?
Exactly, and that's difficult because then you have to explain.
Then you get a pizza party.
And that's at the point you're like, well, listen, man. Is this going to be a problem going forward? Or are you going to, is this going to affect your work? And if it does, then as an at-will employer, I got to be thinking to myself, well, I don't want this disgruntled person around if they're going to be complaining about somebody who has nothing to do with their work being late all the time.
Well, this is interesting to me. So they're only disgruntled though because you want to enforce your rules.
Yeah, it's true. Exactly. But that's what I mean. It's like there's no way to win this.
Let me put on my devil horns here as devil's advocate. It's crazy because you have to make those decisions. Because that might be cutting off a nostril, not your nose, to spite your face, because your other nostril is worth more than whatever that other position might be.
Yeah.
And that might be a good business decision for you. I don't know.
And that's the thing that makes HR so difficult, because it's a legal decision, it's a business decision, it's just a relationship decision. It has so many things that go into it, and then it just gets so overwhelming that a lot of times these underpaid, underappreciated, ignored employees who are doing things that they're not supposed to be doing start screwing up and not caring as much. So I think now would be a good time to take a break. One thing that I'd like to go over in our next segment is bullying in the workplace. And just have a talk about the difference between kind of bullying that happens in the workplace that is actionable legally, where you should go to a attorney and find out what your rights are, and then bullying that steps over the line, that goes into harassment or discrimination that fits the legal description of those things. So we'll pull out some examples from Reddit as well. All right, we're back with our podcast, HR is Dead, and we killed it. Arta here with you, with Ryan Ellis, and wanted to go over bullying in the workplace, because that's a big topic. I get a lot of people coming into my office all the time telling me that they're being bullied at work and they want to sue for harassment and discrimination. And I think it's really important to kind of talk about the distinction between what is the commonly understood definition of bullying and then the bullying that steps into the realm of being legally actionable. So what we're going to do is just talk about the definitions of bullying first, and then I want to talk about a post that we found on Reddit that talks about this exact situation and gives examples, and then go over some of the comments and talk about the comments, and then we'll talk about the perspective of plaintiff attorney, the perspective of defense attorney, the perspective of the manager, the employee, and just everything, just so you can get a full picture of what's going on. So Ryan, I want to start with asking you, what is the definition of everyday bullying that you see people consider to be bullying in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that's hard because everybody takes everything differently, right? What you might perceive as bullying or bitchiness, as they call it in the office nowadays, is not necessarily bullying in like a legal perspective. I think bullying is anything you say to somebody that they don't want to hear, which unfortunately in California means literally anything. But really, I think the traditional sense of bullying from a legal consulting perspective is statements and comments or otherwise other conduct that is intended to annoy, harass, or oppress somebody else. I made that up as I was going, so I'm sure there's a case.
I think that's pretty good. I think you're good there.
I'm sure there's a jury instruction somewhere on it, but essentially intimidating, harassing, just conduct that doesn't necessarily rise to the level of physical harassment or emotional harassment, but just like being a pest.
Pushing people around, kind of intimidating them, making them feel stupid.
Right, high school drama. Like imagine if you were, instead of in an office, and we'll go back to your example of like a school, you're in high school or you're in middle school, and somebody says something like, "Oh, I feel sorry for you." Like, what do you do to that? That's like, what? Did you just say that? Like, we're adults here. Like, who says that? One, it was unnecessary, and two, like what? Really?
Well, and I also think that it's very good to bring up the example of school, because this is where a lot of the conditioning starts for how to deal with these situations. That becomes your life when you're older at work is in high school and in middle school, and people being told by authority figures like teachers or counselors or principals or whoever it is to forget about it, or don't be a tattletale, or making a big deal about, or the opposite of making a big deal about and doing something and then creating an expectation that there's an authority figure who's going to solve your problem. And that authority figure a lot of times, manifests as the HR department.
It's funny, I was bullied as a kid, and it shapes my anxiety that I have today. Just seeing like how people interact. I never knew what threats or violence were as a kid. You don't know what that is when you're experiencing it, but it's not something that makes you feel good inside. As you grow up and you realize like, whoa, like that's what it was. It was anxiety and not anxiety. Like mental health now is a forefront of a lot of, of the world now, which is great. Because a long time ago, like 10, 20, 30 years ago, nobody cared about mental health. Like not saying they don't care about it, but it wasn't to the forefront of society, or people didn't ask you, hey, I know you're dealing with a lot right now. Like, how's your mental health? You talk to somebody. So that one thing, it shapes as a kid. And two, in the exact environment. In school, for me, same thing. You're being bullied. Like, what do you do to get out of it? Who's going to help you? Who's not going to help you? What have you tried to do? And it's literally the exact same thing from school in the workplace, right? Going back, it's a constant example. You have your principal or your dean. You have rules you're supposed to follow, and you have people who don't abide by those rules. So what do? Well, if I tell on this kid, he's going to beat me up, or further harass or intimidate me or whatever. But if I don't tell, then I have to deal with it anyway. Like, what's worse?
Exactly, and people who feel that there's no place to go because they've gone to HR, they've gone to a manager, and haven't received help, or they don't want to go to a manager or HR because they feel like it's just going to make things worse. That's a very powerless position to be in. And one thing that makes school so difficult, and also working in a big company difficult, is that you see the same people over and over every day.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point. In school, though, I'm gonna attempt to break these two examples apart for like a learning experience. In school, you almost have to fit in, right? Whether that's with your group of friends, whether that's with your grade, whether that's with your age, with your class, and not with like necessarily like, oh, you know, the golf kids or the cool kids or the jocks or whatever, but like you have to fit in somehow, right? Whether it's with your friend group, with your classmates, with your age division, with your whole grade, whatever. There's a level of fitting in. And I guess you're forced to do that, right, to some degree. But in real life, you don't have to do that. Like, I learned this very recently. You don't need to have a million friends. You don't need to appease everybody. You don't need to be nice to everybody. Mike Tyson said, someone who's a friend to everyone is an enemy to himself. And I might be misquoting, but yeah, so like, you don't have to be nice to everybody. You're there, in real life, in the company, you're there for yourself. Like, you're there, you're not at work because you enjoy work. Like, no, maybe some people enjoy work, but like, you're there because you're getting paid to be there, right?
Yeah, you have a job to do, and you've traded your time to do that job for money from the company.
Right, and like my dad always said, still says to me, I don't want to go to work. He says, well, if work was fun, they would call it fun. They wouldn't call it work, but that's what it is. And so you kind of get these idioms in your head and these sayings in your head. But so when you go to work, you don't need to fit in, right? You don't need to. And a lot of people keep that fit in, I need to get in where I fit in mentality, or have a click, or have something at work, when you don't need to. Like, you don't have to hold, and there's a reason I'm saying it this way. You don't have to hold that like sacrosanct to not give that up or be a tattletale, because at work, yes, you have to deal with people. But I can guarantee you, any good company with a good HR department, or just any good HR department, will recommend that you get moved, transferred, promoted, demoted, or whatever for the same pay to a different department if you're getting harassed and keep reporting it. Because at the end of the day, if you and me are working across from each other in desks, desk mates or whatever, and you just harass me every day, if I don't say anything, it's just going to get worse. You're not going to just wake up one day, have an epiphany, oh, I'm going to stop harassing Ryan today. No, you're just going to keep doing it because that's what you do. It's your comfort zone. But if I tell on you, if I report you to HR, and HR actually knows what they're doing or does anything, like investigates or does any disciplinary thing, after a couple times, you're going to be gone, or I'm going to be gone to a better place.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty is finding the line on when it becomes a problem that you need to report. And I think just for bullying in general, once it gets to a point where it's impeding you from doing the job that you're being paid for because somebody is harassing you or bothering or bullying you, and you can't do your job and you can't concentrate on your job to perform what you've been paid for, then that's when it gets to a point where you need to take some action.
So can you give me an example? I mean, because I think everybody has a different line, especially in California. But what's your line? In my example of the being desk mates and just kind of giving off-color comments, if I was making off-color comments about you or to you, what would your line be?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, it's very difficult because, again, there's that mentality that you're not supposed to be a tattletale. You're supposed to suck it up. You're supposed to deal with things. You're supposed to be an adult. And that comes with a certain measure of dealing with people's personality quirks and things like that. But again, yeah, if somebody is bothering me to the point where I can't get my work done, I think that's the line, because I'm there to get work done. Of course, there's going to be personal relationships involved at work friends and things like that, and socialization, and that's very important to be in a good environment. But yeah, I mean, I think once I'm at the point where I can no longer do the job effectively and it's affecting my performance and it could lead me to getting fired, then that's the point where I'm going to get up and say something. That's going to be different for everybody. And again, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier about common sense and things like that. And people are bringing their past experiences from high school, being bullies, themselves or being bullied, both, and that's going to reflect into their work, because nobody's really taught what your personality is supposed to evolve like, other than kind of sharpened by social interactions.
Right. And I think that's a good segue too into like how management should deal with this, right? I mean, any company in California worth, that doesn't want to defend a million lawsuits has a company handbook, right? So any company handbook should have an anti-bullying, anti-harassment policy, which means that the company has acknowledged that it exists and they should have a method or means to address it. Which also means management might not want to deal with it. This might be one of those things like, really, Sally, like just get along, like just
Figure
do
it
your
out.
job. Yeah, figure it out.
Figure it out.
Right,
Yeah.
do your job.
You're an adult. You have to figure it out.
Right, but then that could be your first complaint, and then your second complaint the next couple of days where there's another comment, and eventually they're gonna have to address it. And if they don't address it, in California, they're gonna get sued, or even worse, they get a class action because they're not enforcing policies on several levels. So I think management might not wanna deal with these kind of little, like very little, like pebble in the shoe issues, but those pebble in the shoe issues become big problems when you're running a marathon. So.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty for management is, what is the line that they have to accept? Because a lot of times you might get somebody who you think as the manager is just complaining for no reason, but you still have to address the problem that's being brought to you so it doesn't snowball into something bigger. But yeah, you might have a situation where an employee comes and says that they're being bullied or harassed, and as a manager or a HR person, you have to tell them, listen, this is not as big of a deal as you're thinking, or you're making it out to be, and you have to figure it out. Or as a manager, you got to bring in both the employees together and talk to them, or solve this.
Yeah, have a one-on-one or have some kind of a remediation session. No, I agree, and that's like with the growing level of mental health issues and like remediation. I think that's a great answer. But also that answer that comes from HR, it is an issue or isn't an issue, comes after an investigation. And this word investigation, I'm sure, will come up a million times in this podcast, but management has a job, or HR has a job to look into the situation, right?
So I have a lot of people coming in who want to sue employers, telling me that they've been bullied or they're being harassed or discriminated and they want to sue. And I'll ask them, I said, well, what's going on? And they'll say, oh, well, my manager favors another one of my employees, like they're friends and they're not friends with me. Or I get twice the amount of work that I'm supposed to get, or I get yelled at all the time to work faster. So let's take the work faster example, that somebody is being bullied all the time by their manager to work faster. Is that something that you would be worried about as somebody who consults with a company?
A lot of factors go into that response. Like employee shortages is one of them, but assuming like in a vacuum of like just general business, I have no issues if I need to hire someone to replace that person, I could. Or I have enough adequate funding to kind of supply my department with the people they need to get the job done. Oh yeah, I mean, obviously I have an interest as an employer to tell you to do your job faster, because if you're making widgets, for example, you make 10 widgets in an hour, I want you to make 11 or 12 or 15 or 20. But at a certain point in time, that becomes unsustainable. And then on the contrary, like I want to make sure you're happy. So I have to push you to a point of, I don't know if it's like there's like a range of like comfort versus adverse reaction, to where I can push you to do more of an efficient job and less of like a derogatory, jaded employee. And that's different for everybody, right? I mean, some people like to impress their employers, other people are just there for the paycheck. But yeah, I mean, if I'm telling somebody to work harder, personally, my management style, that's because they're not doing their job. It's not because they're not meeting my quota, it's because they're not doing the basics of their job. And that's usually my internal first warning of, I'm watching you, do something. This happened to me recently with one of my employees, where I was like, look, like, let's talk about something, like, how is this working out? In kind of a very not nuanced way of approaching a general or a specific situation. That made it was all better after that. Like the person figured it out, or we talked about what issues were and whatever. But I could see in a bigger company when upper management is telling its middle to lower management, like, get your numbers up, whatever that might mean, and then just the whip comes down, and now people are worried about getting their job done or getting fired. But then again, like, you get hit too many times with this, someone telling you to work harder, you're going to tell them to F off, and then you want to do it anymore. And then you put your job in jeopardy, and then the company, and then it goes back up the chain through your management levels to the top. So I think telling somebody to work harder, personally, is not bullying. It's more of a very bad way of trying to make the company produce or be more efficient.
Yeah, and a thing that I tell a lot of potential clients who come in, and I say, well, them telling you to work harder or work faster, even as a plaintiff's attorney, I'm looking at it as that's just supervising. that's being a supervisor, that if you notice employees being slow or not working or goofing off, you have to go and tell them and confront them about their lack of production. And I think a lot of people take that as employees will take that as them being bullied, but it does require a certain amount of self-reflection from the employee to see, okay, am I not doing my job? But there is a line, a very difficult to define line in a lot of senses because of the nuances, but very clear line from the government in what bullying crosses over into legally actionable harassment discrimination. And that's what we want to talk about next, is when bullying turns into something that's legally actionable, because the law usually wants to stay out of the business of businesses until the business is behaving in a way that crosses a line that becomes legally discriminatory or legally defined as harassment. So, Ryan, why don't you give us the legal definition of harassment?
Yeah, so California jury instructions define harassment essentially as that somebody was subjected to conduct they believe to be harassing or harassment. Again, vague for a reason. That it was severe or pervasive, which means it altered their working conditions or work environment. But the kicker here is that a reasonable person would have believed that it was intimidating, oppressive, abusive, hostile, stuff like that, that your work environment was changed because of it, or it became hostile, oppressive, intimidating. So with that definition, a lot could be and could not be harassing, because you have that reasonable person, a quote unquote, subjectively objective standard of what a reasonable person would believe, or if that reasonable person would believe that it was, it subjected, or created your work environment to be harassing, hostile, oppressive, intimidating, stuff like that. I feel like this is a segue though into a more defined term. Or do you have the definition off the top of your head?
So it says, under California law, workplace harassment is defined as unwelcome conduct in the workplace based on a protected characteristic such as sex, race, age, disability, or sexual orientation that is severe or pervasive enough to create a hostile or abusive work environment, or that results in adverse employment decisions such as termination, demotion, denial of promotion.
Okay. I wasn't far off.
No, I mean, that's generally what it is. I mean, you'll get a lot of different definitions that basically say the same thing. But one thing I hear a lot is people complaining about a hostile work environment. And that is something that has its own kind of legal definition that really relates to these protected characteristics like age, sex, race, and disability, or sexual orientation. Those are the things that then you have a legal problem on your hands as an employer, and that as an employee you can go to a lawyer and that's going to perk up their ears, that somebody getting fired for being gay, getting fired for resisting sexual advances from your boss, being too old to work at a job, or a disability. Those are the things that as a plaintiff's attorney that I deal with.
I'm trying to think, can you think of an example of a comment that would not fall into one of the protected categories of harassment? Like if I said, hey, you're too old to do this job, obviously that's age, right? Or hey, like a woman couldn't do this, or a man couldn't do this, sex. Do you have an idea of a comment that doesn't really hit on one of the protected characteristics? Obviously religion is one of them, sex, gender, orientation, race, color, creed, religious, country of origin, all that stuff. Is there anything you would think of, a comment that is so offensive yet innocuous enough to not be considered harassment?
You suck at your job.
But isn't that based off a protected characteristic of just me? That's not really a characteristic, is it?
No, that's not a characteristic. Right. That's just based on your performance.
That's just being mean.
But if yeah, exactly. It's just being bitchy. If I said you suck at your job because you're Peruvian.
Yes, that's true.
You suck at your job because you're a guy. You suck at your job because you're trans. Those are issues. But if you just tell someone they suck at their job, or they're slow worker.
What if you didn't know that I was like disabled in some regard, or I was trans, or I was gay, or I was not, I look Caucasian but I'm not Caucasian? Like, what if you didn't know when you made the comment? Would it still be harassment?
Well, this is when the company needs to step in and do an investigation of what's going on. This is when the manager has to say to the parties, well, why do you think they're harassing you? And why are you harassing this person, to the harasser, and to kind of get more information. I think the difficulty with a lot of stuff is that we can't give you good answers until we know all the facts.
And now's a good time to enter like that specific to all of you out there. Like, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is not legal advice.
It is not legal advice from either of us.
This is for a podcast with we're taking examples that may or may not be extreme with crazy facts or not. These do not apply to you out there, and we're not making any representation that's any specific decisions or what is or is not legal or may, be harassing or not harassing based on our talk here. So don't take it as legal advice. This is not legal advice.
Yeah, we're just trying to pick specific examples to kind of give a better slice of this type of stuff that you could expect to deal with, and just kind of as a thought-provoking exercise.
Like illustrate.
Because it's impossible to explain every situation, every exception. But what I want to do is give everybody a real-life example of somebody who feels like they were bullied, and just talk about it from the perspective of the person being bullied, the perspective of management, the perspective of the HR department of the company, and the perspective of attorneys, both plaintiff and defendant. So, I pulled this up from Reddit. This was somebody who posted about 5 months ago that was being bullied at work. The title of the post is, "Am I being bullied at work?" And the poster goes on to say,
they're asking, it's probably yes. Go on.
"I'm asking because I went to my supervisor and she dismissed my concerns. My office doesn't have HR. We were supposed to go to our supervisors with any issues. I need to know if I have a leg to stand on." So this is just very common of what I deal with as a plaintiff's attorney. Sounds very kind of reminiscent.
Say what state they're in.
This is in North Carolina.
We're going to presume they're in California now.
Yeah, for everything we're talking about, presume we're in California, please. This person was working 5 years at the company as a manager, and they had a new admin who started 4 months previously that decided they didn't like this poster. And they listed a bunch of stuff that this person has done that they're wondering if they're being bullied for. So asking if I was a fan of a musician in a disgusted tone. And then,
hold on a second, do they say which musician?
It doesn't. I can only think it's Taylor Swift. She will sometimes sing a line from a song and then give me a mocking look. And said that her life was...
Can you demonstrate the mocking look for us? Okay, go on.
Was that good? Okay.
Yes, great.
Thank you.
Hope the camera was on for that one.
I think you have to do kind of a moan. She said that her life was more valuable because she has kids. Let's see. Told me that she didn't think I was funny in response to me saying I didn't like getting blackout drunk. Will whisper in someone else's ear while looking at me and then laugh. Every time she's in the middle of a conversation and I walk by, she'll stop talking and laugh.
Is this an adult that posted this? Is there a limit on who can post on Reddit? I don't know how to...
Listen, everybody's anonymous, but I'm hoping it's I'm hoping it's a kid, I guess. Has shut the door in my face multiple times. Talks about having group chats that I'm not invited to. Make plans for everyone in the office, but excludes me. Honestly, this is kind of sucky. Often says, "I feel sorry for you" in a condescending tone after I say something. So these are the examples they gave. And, I just want to go through.
Did the person say they went to their supervisor, or what, is that how it ends?
So it says, "I have tried talking to my supervisor multiple times, but she is friends with this person."
Oh, God. This is exactly what we talked about earlier.
Yes.
About how you can't report it.
We're all adults and can decide who we like and don't like. You need to stop taking everything personally. She's just joking.
I do this to my wife and see what she does. Yeah. I want to whisper to my son, look her in the eye and laugh. See how that goes for me.
See how that goes, exactly. I mean, so a lot of this, on its face, it seems very childish. That's kind of where we're making light of it. I mean,
so from a manager perspective, what do you think?
Well, from a management perspective, listen, I can understand why the manager would kind of want to roll their eyes at something like this, because you would hope that your employees as adults would, first of all, not engage in this type of behavior. But second of all, if they were subject to this, that they would be able to solve things by talking to the person who's bothering them or attempting to bully them and try to get it sorted out before escalating. But as the manager, I would take it seriously. I would ask what the deal is. Give me examples. I would talk to the person. And then at a point, you need to step in and try to see if this is something that you need to use discipline for.
Does it matter to you, or are you putting yourself in like a generic management perspective, or are you putting yourself in a perspective of like, I'm a friend with the offender, I'm still going to comment, or is this subjective?
I guess it's more subjective. If I'm friends with the commenter, I'm going to tell the person, get the hell out of my office.
But that's the thing though, it's funny, so if I have a different perspective on that. If I was the friends with the offender, and the person that was being, harassed or allegedly harassed or bullied or whatever came into my office, I would take it seriously, because if it's my business, I don't want the business to go down, right? But also I would tell my friend, what the heck are you doing? Like, quit it. Like you're causing me problems. Like don't cause me problems, cause yourself problems.
Yeah, even if you don't think it's necessarily something you could get sued for, just because it's at the point that somebody is being bothered by your behavior, I think it would.
I would feel better telling my friend like, hey, quit it, man. Like even if it was like over like a drink or something or a coffee, I'd be like, hey, man, like, Susan complained about you. Like I'm doing my investigation, but just stop. Like cut it out.
So I think that's the perfect place to start. And if you're an employee who talks to their manager and feels like they haven't gotten anywhere, in this case, there was no HR department. So that's very difficult. But yeah, I think as the employee, the first step is to talk to your manager. If your manager doesn't do anything, then go talk to HR and have HR kind of escalate. But as an HR person, how would you feel if somebody came into your office and told you that these things were happening and they felt like they were being bullied?
I feel like this is an easy answer for me because if I was an HR professional, and this came into my office, I would like to take this because I would sit down with both of them individually, ask what happened, probably a 5-minute, 10-minute conversation. Then I'd schedule a time to put us in the same room and hash it out and be like, person A, offender, like, why do you feel this is necessary? And then, assuming again the individual conversations didn't go extremely poorly and there's some other bias or animus there that we couldn't address in the same room, and I'd try to work it out as adults. Because at the end of the day, we have to be stuck in this office, this example, we'd be stuck in this office for 8 hours a day or more, depending on how many hours you work. So we have to get through this. And I would actually enjoy this conversation because to me, it's kind of funny that one person is offended by this stuff. I mean, I get it. It sounds very severe and pervasive, so I get it. I completely empathize with that. But at the same time, to me, it's comical again that the person is actually doing this stuff. Like to me, I go to work and I do my job, to pay my bills and be able to enjoy things with my family, right? That's why I do it. I enjoy it a lot. That's why I work so much. But at the same time, like I do it for a purpose, right? Time exchange for money. So to me, it's what is this person, the offender,
Gaining.
Gaining. Like there's something there that they can't live without that they're gaining by like this. I'm trying to think of a good word to use, but just being a child and acting like a child, like an unprofessional, immature child.
Yeah, and I think the difficult part is being able to kind of put yourself in that person's mental state because before I started in this area of practice, I would say kind of doubtful or dubious of a lot of things that I heard that were happening in the workplace. That it was a big deal because
there's no way that happened.
Yeah, exactly. Because when it's stuff that you wouldn't engage in yourself, it becomes harder to believe. So it really takes a lot of kind of empathetic thinking as a person in management or HR. To be able to put yourself in the shoes of both parties and figure out what's going on so you can solve the problem. And also knowing, when you have to escalate and go talk to general counsel because you feel like this is a point where, oh man, we might get sued because our employee is now engaging in behavior and bullying behavior that's going to get us sued. Is this something that if you heard that you would run over to general counsel and talk to them about possibly getting sued?
I wouldn't because I think, again, depending on the example you gave, to me isn't severe enough to like terminate the offender. Because as HR, I'm assuming we're hearing this all at one time, right? If this is over a period of time, the person might be terminated if it didn't stop. Let's say I'm learning this all for the first time, all of the examples you gave previously, it would result in some sort of discipline I would recommend as HR, some sort of discipline to the offender. Whether that's a write-up, whether that's a note to file, whether that's some sort of progressive discipline as pursuant to the company's policies, practices, procedures, and handbook, whatever. But definitely discipline that person. I mean, as much as I don't want to, if she's my friend or he's my friend, I don't know if there's a gender there. I absolutely would need to, from a business perspective, as an HR person, you need to discipline this person.
Let me put in from a plaintiff's attorney's perspective why you need to do that because if that employee does sue, you want to have a record of having investigated this and taking it seriously because that's going to make their case a lot weaker.
That's a good point I wanted to address quickly then is if I put a note to their file or I do some sort of discipline pursuant to my company's policy, is that enough to document that one incident where you would turn down that as a potential client?
I think so. I don't think I would take that person as a client at that point because it hasn't gotten to the point where anything is necessarily legally actionable. I think one of the commenters in this particular thread pointed out being a bitch isn't illegal.
It's so funny because it's true.
And it's true. Being a bitch isn't illegal. And that's the thing. Like now as the employee, you got to figure out, in a situation where something is happening that's not necessarily illegal, how you're going to deal with this. Are you going to put up with it? Are you going to move jobs? And that's really part of the thing that makes HR and employment law and work seems so unfair to people is that a lot of times you're not going to find a situation or a solution that is going to be acceptable to you and like emotionally validating and make you feel better. You might have to change jobs. And that sucks, and that is completely unfair. But again, it doesn't rise to the point of where you're able to, say, file a lawsuit against the company because it's not based on your age, your disability, your gender, your national origin, the language you speak, and your sexual orientation.
Well, from that example, yeah, it doesn't seem like any of that applies because, I mean, what kind of music you listen to is not a protected class. She doesn't talk about, or the poster doesn't talk about anything specific that seems to be a protected class that I can recall. So yeah, I mean, that just might be a general policy violation of, hey, don't be a bitch. You know, essentially, anti-harassment, anti-bullying policy that you're enforcing as part of your company, not as a California law or as a law. But no, absolutely. I mean, it's crazy that people do that, what they do. Just to wrap this example up from a legal perspective, give you my thoughts here is, I really would love to take this case as a defense because I don't, barring anything else, I think that this would be a great defense case where, one, I could show my client I know what I'm doing, two, I would get paid for it, and three, it would most likely be a successful result.
Yeah, and as a plaintiff's attorney, this is one where I wouldn't really be interested in touching this. And it becomes difficult because you got to explain to somebody, again, there is no universal cosmic standard of fairness. It doesn't exist. We as people can carve out fairness in our own daily lives by our own actions, but there's a saying, justice costs money. And it does. And going after somebody for harassment discrimination has to get to a level where the payoff is going to be enough that an attorney wants to take this on. Because a lawsuit is a ton of work and it's a ton of time and very emotionally taxing for the client, for the attorney. And so really the most egregious examples of harassment are the ones that get taken care of in court or lawsuits because of this. So it leaves a lot of people feeling like the system has failed them and that, people are getting away with stuff. But that's just kind of the reality of the work environment and the fact that the law can't reach into every single aspect of life and try to regulate it. It's called a court of law. It's not a court of fairness. Yeah. And it's like a really dumb thing to say and kind of glib, but unfortunately that's kind of the reality.
Yeah, no, agreed. And it takes a lot of time too. So it's interesting that if you, in California, for example, if that person in that example files a lawsuit today, at quickest to get a trial in California or like a county like Los Angeles would be like 2 years. So if
minimum, yeah.
Yeah, if this happens, and then like on day one, and you sue on day two, and you get a new job, you move on, like personally, whatever you do, you move on with your life, you're not going to go to trial for, probably an average of 2 years at this point, given all the backups and the backlogs in the court system. So like then when you go to trial, you got to take time off work to go to your trial for the previous thing. It's just it's a shenanigan, and unfortunately, I say shenanigan for like people's lives because that's the way the process works, and it's been like that for a long time. But if they want that justice or that fairness, they have to go to a trial, whether it's by their peers or by a judge. I mean, they have to go through that process. So.
All right, well, we're kind of wrapping up over here. I think we've gone over a lot of stuff, setting a little bit of a foundation for, problems in HR, how to think about HR, and on our next pod, we're going to talk about the role of HR, the specific role of HR, and what a kind of best practices for what HR should be doing at your company and what HR shouldn't be doing at your company, and try to define that so people can kind of understand how their company can operate in a better way. And by better way, we mean not getting sued, because that's really everything that it comes down to. If you just run your company in a way where you're like, okay, let's run it not to get sued, you will most likely create an environment that is going to be acceptable for 90% of your employees.
No, that's really well said. I look forward to hearing you on the podcast. And thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, good luck out there.